He'd already published his first collection, 18 poems, in 1934. And where was he when he wrote those poems? His hometown, Swansea.
I wonder whether you remember a friend of mine.
What's his name?
Young Thomas.
What's he look like?
He'd be about 17 or 18, and about medium height. Above medium height for Wales, I mean. He's 5'6½". Thick blubber lips, snub nose, curly mouse brown hair, one front tooth broken after playing a game called Cats and Dogs in the Mermaid Mumbles. Speaks rather fancy, truculent, plausible, bit of a shower-off. +4s and no breakfast, you know. Used to have poems printed in the Herald of Wales. There was one about an open-air performance of Electra in Mrs. Bertie Perkins's garden in Sketty. He lived up the uplands. A bombastic, adolescent, provincial bohemian with a thick-knotted artist's tie made out of his sister's scarf. She never knew where it had gone. And a cricket shirt dyed bottle green. A gabbing, ambitious, mock-tough, pretentious young man. And moly, too.
There's words. What you want to find him for? I wouldn't touch him with a Archibald, would you, Mr. Griffith? Mind, you can never tell.
He didn't sound Welsh, did he? I don't think he... I never thought of him as being sounding Welsh.
He caught the lilt of Welsh because it was all around him. He caught the hoyle, that powerful sing-song of the old-style Welsh preachers, now, alas, almost gone from the Welsh pulpit. And Dylan, curious enough, although he never spoke Welsh, was probably the last great practitioner of the hoyle.
Wales is a foreign country. They do things differently there. Some people see the Welsh as poor relations of the English, even going so far as to think it's perfectly okay to make racist remarks about them, as did Dylan Thomas's wife. Insulting the Welsh has become a kind of English hobby. Thomas's parents would have spoken Welsh at home, but his father did not want the boy to grow up learning the language. He felt that being Welsh-speaking would have impeded the boy's progress, a commonly held delusion of the time. And Thomas, when you hear him, doesn't sound particularly Welsh. He cultivated a kind of classic English actor's voice, the one you hear on the recordings. He once described himself as a poor man's Charles Lawton. But don't be fooled by that. Dylan Thomas was Welsh, all right.
Once he was with his Swansea friends, he was relaxed in a way that I don't think anybody ever saw him. You know, in those days he was laughing. And when Dylan laughed, he used to hug himself like a child and laugh uproariously so that he couldn't stop.
Because we were always afraid of what our parents would say when we got back and explained we'd been out with Dylan. If you could paint Swansea red, we painted it a very pleasant colour of red, and Dylan was the chief painter.
I didn't really like Dylan Thomas's poetry in my 20s. I thought his work was lacking in rigour, the kind of stuff that ends up on tea towels. I don't think that way now, nor do a lot of other people. If you put Thomas's name into a search engine on the World Wide Web, you'll get around 270,000 hits for Dylan, and for W.H. Auden, you'll get around 120,000. Dylan Thomas is the most familiar, most famous poet of the 20th century.
He knew exactly what he was doing from the very beginning. He had no doubts about himself. He often thought he was going wrong, taking the wrong turning, but he had no doubt that in the end he was going to be a very important poet.
He had a very literal mind. I mean, when I first met him, he described the work of revision he did on his poems as very like plumbing, getting things in the right position and so that they function properly.
There was, when he was very young, something very romantic about being ill and dying young. He told me that he was tubercular. He'd been to see a doctor who'd given him only 6 months to live. None of this being true.
Well, as regards English, he was always top. But as regards everything else, he didn't bother.
He didn't go on to university.
No, he wouldn't go. He said, well, when his dad used to ask him,
He used to say, well, there's no need of it.
He could put on that coy look with those big, wondering eyes of his, and those little bubble curls you had in those days, and he'd look so innocent. And then suddenly he'd start to smile. He had a cracked tooth which gave him almost a Satan look. You know, suddenly you could see that there was that the angel was a wicked angel.
One of the things that I remember most of all about Dylan is his tremendous sense of fantasy weaving. For example, we could be involved for hours, even days, on problems like how many mice it would take to pull the Flying Scotsman from Glasgow to Euston.
The only person he was afraid of was his father. And the rest of the masters he treated with a rather pleasant form of contempt.
Dylan probably played truant as much as he attended school. When Dylan felt like pushing off, he just climbed over the school wall and was gone. The fact that his father was senior English master acted as no brake upon that at all.
His father was my English master. Dylan's father himself was a very remarkable man, a great scholar, tremendous appreciation of English literature. He used to talk to us boys as if Chaucer was an old boy of Swansea Grammar School. He made things vivid, exciting, and he had a touch of Dylan in him. I think he felt towards the end that Dylan had fulfilled all the ambitions that he, Dylan's father, could have done if he'd really applied himself to it.
We've seen the young poet, encased in talent like a uniform, struggling his way out of obscurity, in both senses of the word, to become a respected and comparatively well-paid public figure. We've seen his much mythologized romantic persona, difficulties with women, with money, difficulties with drink, and the potent image of his death, as insidiously glamorous as Keats's consumption or Shelley's drowning. But remember, it's only a handful of lyrics that most people know, which certainly don't include Altar Wise by Owllight or How Shall My Animal. Why did he influence John Lennon and Bob Dylan? Is it just that there's something rebellious about his attitude? Was it just sex and drink and not having a proper job? Well, he found his lyric gift when he was very young. And Death Shall Have No Dominion was published when he was only 19, long before he was accepted by the literary establishment. When a young man's thoughts turn to love and death, and he can express himself as powerfully as Dylan Thomas, his reputation is made. The heart of the Dylan Thomas story is in his beginnings, which is why we decided to tell it backwards. Its secrets lie hidden a mile or so north of here, in a quiet suburban street in the Uplands district of Swansea.
And I came to the shops and houses of the Uplands. Here and around here it was that the journey had begun of the one I was pursuing through his past.
Having